Morning, folks. Back out at the forge again, specifically at the grinding room. I apologize for the background noise. Apparently they're doing some earth moving or something across the street. I think we're about to get some new neighbors, and that's a shame because it's getting too crowded around here for me. So one of our viewers has asked about to see more of how I grind the knives, how I sharpen the knives, how I fit the handles. So this is the blade that I made in the last video. Before I thought about making this one, I'd already finished one side, sort of finished out one side of the handle, getting it ready to receive the handle scales. Now it's been annealed, so it's soft as it can be. And before I do the rest of it, we're gonna go in here in the grinding room. I'm gonna see if I can get a decent angle on the camera, and we'll see how it's done. Thanks for watching. If you do watch the whole thing, be sure and leave a like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate that, and we'd really appreciate any comments you might have or ideas about future content. Thanks for watching. We're going to start out in here on the grinder on the flat platen, and I'm working the other side of the handle, trying to prepare it for the handle scales. That's a 60 grit belt. I don't really need a smooth finish where the handle scales are going to mount, because actually if it's a little rough, it'll make the epoxy bind better. It'll give it something to bite to the steel and adhere to hold the handle scales in place. But I do need to make sure I don't have any large divots. Small ones are fine because the epoxy will fill the gap in and actually hold better. But I need it to be the same all around the rim, around the edge. Checking it with a straight edge to make sure it's flat. Looks pretty good to me. So we'll move on and start setting our edge for the blade. Now I forged this blade almost to finish. So pretty much all I'm doing is just giving a little polish up, taking the scale off. There are a few hammer marks left, and I'll sand them out. This is really not going to be all that much at all. Now I apologize, not a lot of action in this video, but as I said, one of our viewers asked to see this part of the process, so that's what we're doing. Mind you, this is pre-heat treat that I'm doing all this. This blade is annealed. It's just as soft as it can get. It's a long process. Might be a little bit boring for some of you people. Maybe I should tell some jokes to make it more interesting. Unfortunately, I'm not a very humorous person, and I don't know any jokes. If I did know any jokes, considering I'm a paramedic at my other job, probably none of my jokes would be appropriate. So yeah, we'll just skip that part. Anyway, so I established my bevel on the anvil, and I'm basically just polishing along that bevel. I had the edge initially about as thick as a quarter, and I want it just a little thinner than a dime when I get ready to heat treat. So I'm having to be careful here that I don't grind too much off and get it too thin. It's getting there. And if you folks are wondering just how long this can take, well, mind you, this is a simple grind job, and as you're watching it, it's on double speed, so it's running on fast forward now. You see, I don't use any jigs, any tools. Everything's done by hand. And I'm just using the flat platen. It's pretty good. Got to make sure I keep it cool. At this point, I'm not going to mess up a temper because there's no temper to mess up. But when you're hand sanding, I don't like to wear gloves because a glove around any kind of rotating equipment is a bad idea. And I like to keep everything cool enough that I can keep a good tight hold. So I don't want that blade too hot. Debating on what kind of finish I was going to do on this, whether I wanted to leave it bright, but I think not. I think I'm going to give this blade an antique wash. We got a really nice set of walnut scales to go on it for handles. I think a nice antique finish will be great. And instead of setting in a flat bevel, I think I want to put a nice fine convex edge on this when I'm done. Just to make it a little heavier duty. Clean up my profile a little bit. Not too bad. I think we'll go to the next belt. So we go from 60 grit to a 120 grit belt. And just continue polishing that edge. Some people would go straight from the 60 to the heat treat. I don't like to. Sometimes I'll take a blade all the way up to 600 grit before I ever go to heat treat. Every crack you leave in the steel, every groove, every divot, every scratch, it's a potential place for a stress riser to develop and a potential crack in the blade. So I'm going to bring it down to a reasonable polish before I go to heat treat. And I apologize for the camera position. It was kind of hard to position that camera where I can see the grinder. I just don't have the room for it the way my shed's set up. But hey, we'll do what we can. All I'm working at now is to make sure that my bevel stays the same. And I'm taking out all the 60 grit marks, thinning the edge down a little more. It's a little slow, but it's getting where we need to go. I'd run this on 3 times the speed fast forward if I could have done that, but this editing software won't let me. So we are where we are. Anyway, so we're going to run the 120. Thought about going on ahead and making this a fully ground knife, but I think I'm going to leave a little bit of forge finish at the spine just to give it character. And clean that profile again. Shut her down and see if we can't get another belt. So we're going to go from the 120 grit to a 320 grit, I believe. Don't know, don't remember. Anyway, a fairly fine grit. It's a Trizac. I believe it's made by 3M. That's an A45. That belt's actually fine enough to make a fairly decent satin finish without going any finer, if you're careful with your grinds. And I believe that that belt's going to be fine enough. So when we finish these polishing passes, I'm going to go ahead and drill some holes in that handle and heat treat this blade. I'm not going to bore y'all with watching me drill handle holes. We'll fit the handle another day if somebody's interested. Not today. Yep, that'll do. Well, here we are now. We're going to establish the bevel. This is after the heat treat. This knife is hard. And the blade's ready to go. And as I've decided, I'm going to give this an antique finish. So I'm just going to establish my convex bevel a little bit here. And then we'll buff the blade out. And it'll be ready for me to start my antique finish. I'd intended to make this video and run it all the way through and show the handle fitting and sharpening and all that stuff, but yeah, well, the handle fitting got thrown out the window, and as I was editing, I realized that the video that I had done to show the blade being actually finished and sharpened didn't work out, so I guess we'll have to do that again on another day on another blade. But right now, I am just polishing out my bevel on the 60 grit belt. You can notice I'm using quite a bit of pressure and putting quite a bit of angle on that just to set it where I want it. Using the slack belt. As I get closer to where I want to be, and this is kind of a long process and I have to be careful, but as I get closer to where I want to be, I start to apply less pressure and a less acute angle to bring my convex back along the flat of the blade a little more and give it a little more fine cutting edge. I don't want this knife to be some kind of super razor thin thing for peeling whatever. I want this knife to be sturdy. I want it to be plenty sharp, but I want my edge geometry so that it will retain that sharpness for a long time without having to be retouched. So that's what I'm shooting for, and that's what I'm going to get when it's done. Got to be really careful not to overheat the blade because the heat treat has been done. Don't want to ruin the temper at this point. If you ever get around to making your own blades, this can be pretty tricky if you get in a hurry. And it's really easy at this point to make your actual edge bevel either too steep or not steep enough. All I need to do on the edge at this point is bring it to the 60 and get it set, and then polish it with a 120, probably a 120, just to polish the edge. Then we'll buff the whole blade, and I'll have it ready to go through my antiquing process, and that'll be the end of today's video. Well, except I will throw in a picture of the finished blade at the end. I know this isn't as exciting as watching sparks fly and coal burn and hammers fall, but this is all part of the process. I hate grinding. It's boring, it's tedious. It's really easy to make a mistake that you can't fix, but it has to be done. It's getting there. I'm pretty happy with it. Now you can see that that polished part has already moved considerably away from the edge back up towards the spine. That's as I'm thinning it out to make that edge a little more keen, shall we say. A less intense angle on the cutting edge to make it a little more of a fine cutter, but still robust. So we're good enough there. Get rid of the 60. Throw on a 120 grit belt just to polish it a little bit. Yep. You could screw the whole thing up even at this point by burning the edge. So that's good. Do the other side. Now we're gonna take a Scotch-Brite belt, reasonably coarse Scotch-Brite belt. No, well, sorry, no. We're going with the I believe that's 600 grit first. Just polish that edge a little more. Not trying to sharpen it, just trying to polish it. Pretty keen. Now let's see what we got. I've got to dig it out. There we go. Now we got the Scotch-Brite belt. And all I'm going to do with the Scotch-Brite belt is just a quick polish. Get this blade ready for my antiquing process. Doesn't really have to be super bright and shiny at this point. Matter of fact, it'll take my antiquing treatment better if it's not. So I'm just running it back and forth along the bottom of the wheel. Should have changed my camera angle, didn't. Sorry, my fault. Just basically buffing it out. And unfortunately, like I said, I forgot to do forgot to make sure my camera was on when I did the final sharpening and screwed that up. So this is pretty much going to be our last process for the day on this blade. Here's our finished blade, nice and sharp. All antiqued walnut handles. Thanks very much for watching. Like and subscribe. See you next time.